Chinese biotech companies are making breakthroughs from cancer therapies to weight control treatments. Many are in clinical trials, but when their new drugs reach patients overseas, they won't be under a Chinese brand name.
It's estimated that China is now one of the biggest sources of new drug candidates that go into human trials globally.
We recently announced a $3 billion investment in a partnered manufacturing facility here. We've launched many products and now expect to launch all of our products within weeks of US approval.
What if the next blockbuster drug for American patients is discovered in China? And what if the American pharmaceutical company selling it doesn't actually own the science behind it? That is increasingly becoming the reality of global pharma. Chinese biotech companies are producing promising drug candidates faster, often at a lower development cost, and some of the world's biggest pharmaceutical companies are paying billions of dollars for access. For investors, that's a growth opportunity. For patients, potentially cheaper and faster innovation. But for Washington, it raises a much harder question. Are America's pharmaceutical companies buying innovation or creating a new strategic dependency on China? Hi, this is Indranil and welcome to the Spotlight Media and Technology, where we go beyond profession, beyond headlines, beyond borders. Today, we are decoding Big Pharma's China bet, why US drug makers are increasingly partnering with Chinese biotech companies, why the economics are so attractive, and why this is becoming an ESG, governance, and national security issue. And if you are an investor, entrepreneur, or business leader, there's a much bigger lesson here about dependency, resilience, and the real cost of efficiency. Let's start with the economics. For years, China's pharmaceutical industry was primarily viewed as a manufacturing base. That perception has changed. China has developed a much deeper ecosystem of biotechnology research, drug discovery, clinical development, and contract research. And one of the biggest competitive advantages is cost. Chinese biotech companies can often conduct certain stages of drug development at substantially lower cost than their Western counterparts.
In most places, generic medicines are typically cheaper than their brand name counterparts, but in China, the price gap can be much wider.
At the same time, China's enormous patient population provides an important environment for clinical research. And there's another advantage: speed. Chinese biotech companies have become increasingly capable of moving promising molecules from discovery towards clinical development quickly. That has created something Wall Street understands extremely well: an arbitrage opportunity. Why spend years and billions of dollars discovering every drug internally, when you can license a promising molecule from another company and potentially acquire global rights for a fraction of the cost and time? That is the logic behind the China licensing boom, and the numbers are getting attention. According to industry data, Chinese out-license deals reached record levels in recent years, with global pharmaceutical companies increasingly looking towards Chinese biotech pipelines for oncology, immunology, autoimmune diseases, and other therapeutic areas. This isn't simply a China story anymore. It's becoming a global innovation marketplace. Now, put yourself in the position of a US pharmaceutical executive. You have a problem. Drug development is extraordinarily expensive. A single successful medicine can require years of research, multiple clinical trials, and billions of dollars before it reaches the market. And the probability of failure is high. Meanwhile, patents expire, competition increases, investors demand stronger pipelines. So executives have two choices: build everything internally or buy access to innovation. Licensing can make that second option extremely attractive. A pharmaceutical company might gain rights to a promising drug candidate while paying an upfront fee, followed by milestone payments and potentially royalties. The Chinese biotech company gets capital and global commercialization capabilities. The multinational gets access to potentially promising science without having to build the entire discovery program from scratch. From a pure business perspective, that's rational, and this is important. We shouldn't automatically interpret every China deal as a national security problem. International collaboration has historically been one of the engines of pharmaceutical innovation. Scientists collaborate across borders. Clinical trials cross borders, capital crosses borders, and patients ultimately benefit when promising medicines reach them faster. So the real question isn't, should US Pharma work with China? The real question is, how much strategic dependency is too much? This is where the debate gets complicated. Washington increasingly views certain technologies through a national security lens. Semiconductors, artificial intelligence, critical minerals, advanced manufacturing, and increasingly biotechnology. Why? Because biotechnology isn't just about medicines. It involves genetic information, biological data, research platforms, manufacturing capabilities, and intellectual property. The United States has already taken steps to scrutinize biotechnology relationships involving China. And lawmakers have raised concerns about companies connected to the Chinese government or military access of US biological data and the possibility that American pharmaceutical companies could become strategically dependent on Chinese innovation or manufacturing. The concern isn't necessarily that a Chinese biotech company is doing something wrong. It's about systematic dependency. Imagine a US pharmaceutical company builds a major future revenue stream around a molecule discovered by a Chinese company. Then geopolitical relations deteriorates. Exports controls appear. Licensing restrictions change. Regulators intervene. Data sharing rules tighten. Or the Chinese government changes its policies. Suddenly, what looked like an efficient commercial partnership become a business continuity risk. That's the same lesson companies have learned across energy, semiconductors, and critical minerals. Efficiency without resilience can become vulnerability. And this is where the Spotlight Media and Technology takes a clear position. We don't believe the answer is simply stop doing business with China. That would be far too simplistic. The more important question is, can companies build international partnerships without creating unacceptable strategic dependencies? That's a governance question, and it belongs to the boardroom. From an E, that is environmental perspective, pharmaceutical supply chains need resilience around energy, manufacturing, and resource use. From an S, the social perspective, the stakes are even more obvious. We are talking about medicines, drug availability, affordability, clinical research, and ultimately patient access. If geopolitical restrictions suddenly disrupt the supply of a critical medicine, the social consequences can be enormous. And then there is G, that is governance. Who owns the intellectual property? Where is the underlying research conducted? Who controls the clinical data? Who has access to biological information? What happens if sanctions or export controls change? Can the company replace that supplier or partner? And perhaps most importantly, has the board actually stress-tested the relationship? This is why we believe ESG needs to move beyond the traditional conversation about carbon emissions and reporting. ESG is also about resilience, accountability, stakeholder protections, and long-term governance. And pharma is one of the clearest examples. For American entrepreneurs and business leaders, there is a powerful lesson here. Don't confuse low cost with low risk. A supplier, technology partner, or licensing deal can be commercially attractive today and strategically expensive tomorrow. So ask 4 questions. Number 1, where does the technology actually originate? Number 2, who controls the intellectual property? Number 3, what happens if the geopolitical relationship changes? And number 4, do we have a credible alternative? That 4th question is critical. Because resilient isn't about eliminating every risk. It's about making sure that one political decision cannot bring your entire business model to a standstill. And this applies for beyond pharmaceuticals, AI, semiconductors, energy, critical minerals, rare earth materials, biotechnology. The global economy is increasingly discovering that dependency is itself a form of risk. So, is China's biotech industry a growth engine for big pharma or a national security risk? Our answer is, it can be both. Chinese biotech is producing valuable innovation that global pharmaceutical companies cannot afford to ignore. At the same time, governments cannot ignore the strategic implications of allowing critical healthcare capabilities to become overly concentrated in any single geopolitical ecosystem. The answer isn't isolation, it's intelligent diversification. Because the future of global pharma probably won't be completely Western, and it shouldn't be completely dependent on China either. The winning model may be one where companies collaborate globally while maintaining enough IP control, supply chain diversity, regulatory visibility, and strategic redundancy to remain resilient. Now, I want your view. If you were running a US pharmaceutical company, would you A. aggressively license promising Chinese biotech to accelerate innovation, or B. accept higher cost and slower development to reduce geopolitical dependency? Tell us in the comment section. And if you are an entrepreneur or investor, ask yourself one question. Where is your business efficient but dangerously dependent? Because that may be your biggest strategic risk hiding in plain sight. This is Indranil, and this is the Spotlight Beyond Profession, Beyond Headlines, Beyond Borders. Subscribe, share this with business leaders or investors, and tell us what global business risk we should decode next. If you are navigating geopolitical risk, supply chain resilience, or ESG strategy at your organization, we help companies with ESG strategy and communication. Link in the description. See you in the next video, and this is Indranil. Thank you very much for watching. Signing it off.